technology. In fact, I would also call it generative AI, not specifically ChatGPT. But let's get into this webinar, and I am joined by two experts in the field as well as legal. Many of you know these folks already, but I am here with Josh. Josh, if you can do a brief intro.
Yeah, hello everybody. Great to have you guys join us. I as well will say I'm not an expert. I'm learning this as fast and as much as I can and sharing that journey in a newsletter I write as well. And also teach on business models in legal, and this is directly correlated. So that's sort of my hook and why I'm looking at this and exploring it. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Josh. And then Colin Levy, please go ahead next.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for everyone for being here. I am Director of Legal and Evangelist for Malbec. I also perhaps share too frequently my opinions and thoughts on legal tech in general. I'm definitely not an expert on ChatGPT or generative AI, but I am an active user and learner of it. So that is exciting to me. And as Josh said, I also am trying to learn it as quickly as possible. And I'm really excited to be talking about what is definitely an exciting area with you all.
Great. And my name is Matt Patel, one of the co-founders and COO at Malbec, a modern CLM solution company. And while we all have learned a lot about GPT in the recent past and played with it and read a lot of articles on it, there's much to be discovered. And today's topic is about this concept of generative AI in general, and then also focusing on the legal use cases. And our background, we're focused on a CLM solution. Before Malbec, I was part of another CLM technology company for many years. And it's funny how the age of CLM 1.0, if you want to call it that, 15, 20 years ago when I was in this space, just getting the product installed on a customer server was exciting when it got installed and I can log in. And here, fast forward 15, 20 years later, the expectations from this technology is so much higher. And while AI was the topic for the last 3-4 years, the next best thing is generative AI and what it can do. So looking forward to having a very lively discussion on this exciting topic, and we will be answering questions along the way in the context of what we're presenting. So please do ask in real time. The first slide is laying down the facts. Generative AI is what the actual name is. We're all used to calling it ChatGPT. If you haven't created a login at OpenAI's website, and I'm sure many of you have already written a Valentine's poem for your loved ones, or even written up a presentation. In fact, I was thinking, do I even need to draft this presentation or deliver it? Can't GPT just do it for me? There's a lot of fun things you can do in there. I even asked it to write up a lawyer's poem or a song, and it writes it for me. So it's fun to play with it. But now let's apply it to real life, right? How will it help me with my work? So the first thing is, what is it doing to learn and become so smart compared to the previous generation of AI, let's call it that. Josh, I'll ask you to describe a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes with this new technology.
Yeah, and just I'm not going to explain this like from a technicals perspective. I just want everyone to sort of understand it, right? And some people have probably heard something called LLMs, language learning models, and really just think of that as the corpus of data and information that they have basically trained these AI tools to understand. There's a great article in Washington Post out this morning or late last night where they started to actually open up the black box, because whether it's OpenAI, it's Google's DeepMind, no one really knows what actually is the data that these models have been trained on. And we know, like, for instance, OpenAI's ChatGPT was trained on internet data up until about September 2021, right? And so these models looked at this data and they're basically prediction models. At the end of the day, that's what they are. You put in words and it's using an algorithm to basically predict what the next word could be. And it weights and scores those. So the more words you put in, it's doing all these calculations. And it returns a response. And it was trained to return a response that is conversational. Here's a big key: confident and persuasive. It's not meant to respond to you kind of like hesitant, like it's meant to project confidence. We can get into why that might be problematic when we get into risk. So that's what they're doing. They're training it on large data sets. When we get into sort of proprietary generative AI chat-based models, that LLM, that data set might be your organizations, it might be your businesses, it might be some other cleansed or otherwise approved data set. The last thing I'll say right now, because it's hitting the news, is because of this, because of what it was trained on, a lot of organizations, including like Twitter and some other companies, have basically said, whoa, 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 whoa. You've trained your model on our data, on our user data without permission. You either have to stop training or you have to compensate us for it. So we're kind of in that wild, wild west moment, and we're going to see sort of how future models are going to be able to be trained. Does it get cost prohibitive, so on and so forth. So that sort of hopefully helps everyone understand how these things are being trained and how they've been trained today.
And you touched on something, Josh, which I'm going to bring up a bit later about some of the risks, some of the benefits of this, but also the risks. And many of you may have seen that article a few weeks ago, I think it was, from Samsung, where they released their source code, proprietary code. Now, how does that happen? It's not purposely that somebody was trying to put it out there, right? But when you put something in generative AI to review it for you or give you feedback, you're essentially sharing it out, whether you know it or not. And I know in the past, social media on a personal side, right? Personal information being proprietary, and you can't just share my confidential information. And so many lawsuits have happened, and Facebook was under our litigation. But what about this new thing, right? I mean, you're giving it data and they're using it to learn and train. So I can only imagine that is going to come up more and more of, is my data secured, or is it going to be publicly shared? Colin Levy, any thoughts on this? And maybe you can walk through, from a legal perspective, what kind of data would feed into generative AI, and then what would happen with it?
Yeah, so I was just looking actually at ChatGPT's terms of use earlier.
Lawyer should.
Yes. So, when ChatGPT first came out, in their terms, they didn't give any indication as to what was going on with your data, other than that there was the potential for the data you submitted through the application itself to be used for training purposes. Now it's explicitly called out in the terms of use that they will not be doing that. However, just because they're saying they're not doing it doesn't necessarily mean that they're excluding that data from all eyes that may be on the back end. So what that means in practice, and we can get into this when we talk about some of the concerns and limitations of ChatGPT and other types of generative AI, is that you really want to be careful with what data you share. And primarily, you want to be sharing data that you wouldn't mind sharing, publicly with someone else. It's basically like, anything that you put online on social media or wherever, that information never goes away, no matter what you do or whatever. So, that's why I like to say whenever I post anything online, anything that I post online would be the exact same thing I will tell you in person, because I have nothing to hide. And so when it comes to ChatGPT, you really want to be careful and kind of be cautious in your use, which is not to say you can't use it for really productive things. And Josh, has a great newsletter that goes into some of those productive uses. But you want to make sure that you're only providing the data you have to get what you need out of the solution. And that data is really stuff that, again, is not super proprietary, secretive, trade secrets, things kind of that you wouldn't want to be sharing publicly, just because, that data, once it's out there, who knows where it's going or what could possibly happen with it, no matter what the terms of use have to say.
There is a question which I was going to answer, but maybe I can just answer it in real time for Brandy. A great question, Brandy. Can't vendors just opt out of having their data, shared, right, with with ChatGPT or whoever the vendor you're using for AI training? So there's two types of training. One is the AI training that we have all been looking at, evaluating, or using over the last 4 or 5 years. And yes, that one, even Malbec for that matter, we have our own AI trained terms and provisions for reviewing your contracts and extracting data out of your legacy contracts, etc. That training can be protected, and your data is your data. We don't share that outside. But when you use generative AI, by definition, we as vendors have to send out your contract document or your clause to call their APIs and get the feedback back. So you are sharing it. There's no way to opt out unless you just don't use the feature. That's the only way you can opt out. If you don't use the generative AI feature, then you're not sharing your data outside the system. So I hope that answers the question. I'll also try to type that up if I get a moment, but thanks for asking. If you have any further questions on that, please keep going. I see more questions coming in. I'll answer that in a second. In terms of the tools that exist, so everybody keeps calling this ChatGPT, but now they have GPT-4 from OpenAI. But then there's also Google working on their tool, right? They launched it, they've improved it, and I can only imagine Google having the access to most data in the world, what they can do with this technology. AutoGPT is something I was not very familiar with, candidly speaking, so I did research that a bit. But Josh, I know you have done, you know about that, so maybe you can highlight what that does.
Yeah, I mean, again, keeping it relatively straightforward, AutoGPT, probably the best way to think about it is a GPT model that has the ability to be task and goal oriented, right? So we think of a chat driven model right now where we're just putting in a question or asking it to do something for us, like write something or something like that. AutoGPT sort of unlocks the ability for it to produce something that consists of multiple tasks and multiple resources, right? So for instance, in AutoGPT, I may want to build a simple web-based game, right? Mm-hmm. And so I could use a chat-driven model to come up with the code for that right now. But in AutoGPT, if you think of all the various things that you would need to do for that, everything from website to UI, user interface, to the core code, all that kind of stuff, you can actually use AutoGPT to build product and or build services. So the best way to think about it, it's like a prompt engine that can prompt itself based on your business goals or business objectives. It's very early. There's multiple models out there. A lot of them right now tend to go into this endless spiral of code building and error checking and more code building and more error checking. But the concept has been proven that we can adapt these models to prompt themselves and interpret what our end goal is and break all the discrete tasks and all the discrete resources you would need to go actually execute on that. So that's sort of a nice way of thinking about AutoGPT.
And I think you had mentioned, Josh, when we were talking, why can't GPT prompt itself, right, instead of user entering it? So already predicting what you're going to ask it next. So that is far advanced. I cannot even imagine that level of AI assistant, but that's where we're heading.
Yes.
So if you asked, again, in the context of CLM, if you're looking at a redlined liability clause coming back from your customer, and you ask generative AI tool, what does this mean in business terms? It can give you that answer and tell you what just happened to your liability clause. Did they increase it? Did they increase the risk? But it will also tell you, okay, what's the next thing you're going to ask? Because the document's there, maybe the indemnification is redlined. So it'll also say, by the way, do you also want me to tell you what the indemnification changes are? So predicting what you're going to ask next is going to be very cool.
One thing I just want to add a little color commentary. This might freak people out. It might get you excited. So when we talk about Auto GPT, a lot of people say it is a precursor to AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. And that's sort of the AI that we think of, like the robot that has human sensibilities, and we can't tell if it's a human or a robot when we interact with it. And it's because Auto GPT is basically creating the ability. So Google DeepMind, they were working on a different LLM and trying to train certain models. And unbeknownst and unprompted to anybody, the model taught itself how to converse in Bengali, a completely different language. They had put a couple of prompts in Bengali. It was in the training model. And lo and behold, it started answering in complete and comprehensive Bengali. That's something that's called an emergent capability. And the AI scientists will say that they don't understand how the technology is actually doing that. And they're on the record with saying that. So this is not some fantastical thing. So Auto GPT could be a lead into that sort of AGI. Again, that might freak you out. It might get you excited, but I just wanted to hit on that, how fast things are moving.
I'm going to go on the "it might freak me out" category in this one. There is a cost involved, just to close out on this slide, and we'll start to answer some questions. But this is not going to be free. Clearly, there's a lot of investment from Microsoft, from OpenAI, from Google, from all the different vendors, the platforms that are going to invest in this new technology. Yes, it's free. If you just log into OpenAI's website and want to try out a few features, it's free. But to embed that logic into a CLM, for example, for us, where we have added generative AI capabilities, and we're paying by transactions. So every snippet you send or a contract you get reviewed, there's a cost, and then there will be monthly fees, and God knows what else. There will be options to buy in bulk, but there will be a cost involved, whether you pay directly or indirectly through the technology that you're using that has this capability built in. Some of that cost actually comes from something interesting I learned from Josh, which we will cover, the infrastructure and the power consumption and things that go on behind the scenes that I didn't even think about. But before I get there, let's look at just 5 of each. There's 50 that I can talk about, but what are the benefits? And again, I want to make sure everybody understands the difference between the AI that we've all been reviewing or talking about or using in the last 5 years versus this. The AI in the past, and it's still used, is for extracting information. You put in a third-party paper or a signed PDF, it extracts the terms and clauses. It will help you with contract review, your playbook, but now it's the next level. And the biggest benefit I see here is I don't think it's replacing anyone yet. Everybody keeps talking about it. Will AI or generative AI replace a lawyer's review? No, I don't think anyone's going to trust it 100% anytime soon, but it's going to improve the speed of reviews and speed at which you can move and keep up with your business. So now you can turn things around faster, get things done quicker, get a request in faster, get renewals done faster. So it's going to allow you to move at the speed that your business is moving. Saving on outside counsel spend. So by no means am I saying the value of a lawyer's time, whether you use inside counsel or outside counsel, is less. But here's an example. One thing I have seen in our own contracts, which we review, and Colin Levy is on our legal team, I often have to ask him, when I get a redlined document back, the customer may have changed the indemnification. or liability in red lines where I'm not a lawyer and I just don't understand what it means. What did they do to my contract? So I will send it off to, in the early days of Malbec, we had an outside counsel. So I would send it there to say, okay, what did they do to my contract? Now we send it to Colin, and he has to read and say, okay, Matt, they made your liability very high. It made it uncapped for data breach, and indemnification is not mutual. Okay, so it's now a business decision, right? Whether I want to accept that for the customer that we're selling to. So while I use legal to explain to me what just happened, it's still not legal's decision to say, are we going to allow that or not? It's also a business decision. Well, what if generative AI can just read that redlined cryptic legal clause and tell you in plain English? That will save me a lot of time not bothering Colin every time, or when I used outside counsel, not spending 15 to 30 minutes of billable hours for something simple just to explain it to me in plain English. So that's what I mean by saving on that spend, whether it's internal or external, which also results in faster reviews and decision making. The fourth bullet is measuring against benchmarks. So because generative AI is trained across industries, across the world of data, you can now see how you are doing compared to similar contracts or similar intake or similar requests, whatever it is, whatever industry you're in, whatever your role is, because this goes beyond legal, of course, how you're doing compared to others in your industry, others in your region, or others in a contract type that you're benchmarking. So there's a lot more power to this data than just the historical AI training that was done. Intelligent contract summaries. I actually have a screenshot of this feature. I'll show you that in a minute. But it will help take a big legal document and quickly put 10 to 20 bullet points to summarize the key terms of that contract. On the right side, and then Josh and Colin, I'm going to have you comment or add color commentary here on some of these topics. And in the meantime, by the way, I forgot to mention, if you were able to answer the questions, which I see you're doing, that's awesome, so that we can tag team here. First bullet is near and dear to me. You know, all vendors, and I'm not talking just CLM vendors, it could be any technology that is jumping on this generative AI. We also don't want to lose our core focus. So while maybe we're working on certain features back in December that are important to the customers, and here comes GPT and generative AI, shifting gears and completely, because it can really suck you in. There's so much potential. There's so many use cases that we can build using this technology that we also don't want to lose the core focus, right? What is the CLM designed to do? And balancing that is going to be key. We have purposely added just a few features that impact the business users very quickly, while maintaining our focus on the core product. But there's a lot of capability. So just because it's out there doesn't mean CLM technology can automatically inherit that. There's going to be work done by vendors to incorporate this power into their solutions. Losing your data. When you share it with ChatGPT or GPT-4 or any tool that you will use directly or indirectly through a technology, you're giving them that data. They have data and they're responding back to you, but that data went somewhere, right? And that's why Colin was reading the terms of use on OpenAI's website to see what they can do with it. This is a dependency. Like it or not, a CLM vendor in the context of this conversation, again, I keep saying CLM vendor, but think about any technology. You could be using e-billing, e-discovery, or a CRM, CPQ solution, or a procurement solution. Anyone using generative AI is dependent on some of these tools, because that power cannot be built by us as a vendor, right? That's been training since 5-6 years ago, and building upon all this data across the world. Balancing human versus AI dependencies. This is where how much will you use this capability and trust it to remove some of the manual steps, but still keeping human involvement in your workflow. You cannot just replace a human step by the AI capability completely, because while it is the other thing we have learned, this is important, every time I send something to ChatGPT from our solution, most of the time it's the same result, but sometimes it's different, right? Because this is a live breathing product. This is not a what goes in comes exactly back out the same way every time, because it's learning every second, every minute. So it may not be consistent. So it still requires a human review. And last one is an interesting learning. Josh has some news articles and things that he has read and shared about Northern Virginia, the power consumption. So let's dive into that. But yeah, that's a summary of things that we're seeing. First, Colin Levy, if I can ask you, so picking on some of these, let's talk about the human review versus AI, and we talk about this every time we meet. This is not replacing anyone anytime soon, as far as I know. We used to discuss this even 3 years ago when the other AI capabilities were coming to market, and like, oh, will this replace lawyers? Well, no, it still hasn't. So any thoughts you can share on that from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, well, I think from a couple of different perspectives. One, in terms of my role in what I do as a lawyer. As far as I'm concerned, one less term, one less contract, one less piece of text for me to review and to have some other tool review is perfectly fine by me. I welcome that because that allows me to spend my time more productively on more valuable, sort of more strategic type of work rather than sort of the day-to-day tactical type of work that traditionally has defined what being a lawyer was all about. So there's that. Now, in terms of legal concerns and or constraints around the use of these tools, as I said before, one of those concerns certainly is sharing data, which is kind of what prompted data privacy laws prior to AI to even exist, is to provide some framework around sharing of data and use of that data. Obviously, those laws now need to be updated to somehow address AI to the best that those laws can, which I'm not expecting for them to do it all that well, because laws generally don't do very well when it comes to addressing technology, because technology moves far faster than law does. In addition, I think that you need to kind of understand, if you are one who is concerned about sharing data, is understand sort of what data you need to share to be able to accomplish something you want using an AI tool. Or alternatively, perhaps you don't need to share that much. You can just write a better prompt, i.e. a better sort of input to these AI tools to get the better output that you're seeking without having to provide as much information as you otherwise might have to do. Because the thing to realize about these AI tools, that is generative AI tools, especially language-based ones, is they're very dependent on what you say to them. And they literally look at those words and use those words to define what their output is. So the better you can get at kind of providing the right type of language to these models, the better output you'll get. Another legal concern I would have, frankly, is not just the sharing of data, but also, what other companies are using these AI tools, what sort of other companies are these AI solutions using to provide these solutions to you. So there's a lot of sort of interdependencies that I think are important to evaluate. And basically what I'm getting at is there needs to be more broader transparency around just how these models are created, what goes into using them, and who's controlling them as well. Because certainly governments, for example, are likely working on use of these models. But the problem is once you get governments involved, there's a lot that governments can do without your knowledge. And so there needs to be, I think, greater transparency down that road as well.
And Josh, before I jump into some of the CLM, we have some screenshots here from our own product, but we'll talk about the legal use cases. Maybe a couple of stories, including the AWS or the infrastructure challenges that we face now, as this thing is very, very power hungry and CPU intensive.
Yeah, I mean, I think that stepping away from sort of the ground game, which we're rightly talking about, just something to keep in mind, just because the era and the society that we live in, we're more sensitive to the following than we have perhaps in the past. And that is the GPUs, the chips that are used for the generative AI technology are massively power hungry. We know that Microsoft has just released that they've been working on a chip. The main chip maker, NVIDIA, is working on a chip, all to do a number of things: increase capacity and performance, yes, but to be less power hungry. The data centers that are running these things are just absolutely crushing water consumption. So there's growing green concern and zoning concerns around the country, but also around the globe, with the demand that generative AI in all its forms is creating for more processing power, thereby more data centers. I mean, they're looking at how to augment their power, how to augment cooling systems, because they have to use water. They don't have to. That's the traditional way they're cooling the chips and the processors is water. They can't cool the water down fast enough. Usually it's a closed system. They have cooling towers and all that. So just flagging, just for anyone who cares about the climate or about green initiatives, let's just say that right now, this is not highly efficient or highly green in any way, shape, or form. But again, it's early days, right? It's early days. No doubt we'll advance and hopefully be able to mitigate some of the impacts, the environmental impacts this is going to and is creating.
And there's going to be significant changes in the infrastructure investments. One of the examples I read was Amazon Cloud in the Northern Virginia data centers, how they're revamping and increasing the power availability in that whole area to manage the demands of this generative AI processing that is happening on their servers. So things that go beyond just us, grasping the power of it from the end user perspective. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure and environmental impact to this as well. Okay, so moving on to some of the specifics around this group, right? Legal ops, CLM, or whatever your role might be around the legal environment. What are some of the use cases that this can solve? And by no means is this a full list. There's going to be a lot more capabilities coming from generative AI. Moving on to the next slide here, let's talk about a simple thing like version compare. So we're all used to doing this even 20, 30 years ago. When you get a document back from your counterparty, what do? You version compare. Word, version compare. I don't think that feature has changed much in decades, right? Yeah, small nuances here, but it's such a simple thing that we do day to day. But the next level of version compare is not just showing you what is the difference in the text in red lines, but telling you what it means and what you should do with it. So that is the, while the previous generation of AI, if we want to call it that, I can't believe I said that because it's still new, right? 3-4 years ago, we were all focused on AI. And while we're just getting it to be more accurate and stable and being able to extract data, we're already talking about the next thing here. But AI was able to extract and tell you what's there, but the next generation is more context sensitive, meaning it is going to give you the differences. And as you can see in the screenshot, we want to summarize it for you that, okay, you got version 2 coming back from the counterparty, version 1, here's the differences. Even if the counterparty did not redline it or try to sneak in a change, it won't just redline it for you. It'll actually tell you what the impact is from a legal standpoint and the business user. And does it match up with your playbook? Does it violate your standards? So it is thinking that next step ahead, right? As we said, will it will GPT be able to write the next question that you're going to think of before you even think of it? And that's very powerful. Additional capabilities. This is one I was talking about previously. So I find that certain clauses as a non-lawyer business user, no matter how many times I read this liability clause, it always takes me a few minutes to figure out what exactly does it mean, because it is not straightforward. It's got the exceptions, so you have to figure out where's my base liability and which ones are exceptions to have a higher liability. So having generative AI translate that for me or simplify it for me will mean that I don't have to wait for legal to review this, because if I saw that this translated into uncapped liability, I'm immediately going to go back to my counterparty and say, this is not acceptable. Before I even involve legal, I know they're not going to accept it. Can we talk? I just saved myself a few hours or a few days, depending on how busy your legal team's time is. So it is empowering the business users to move faster. And then it can also, this is not a live screen, but the drop down here in the instructions has other options that say, okay, do you want to rewrite this in other forms? So maybe I can say, can we increase the liability, but not uncap? And it'll generate that content in the bottom. So it can write the redlined clause for you that you can send back to your counterparty. But by doing that, and I saw Brandy and other ask this question on the chat, can you protect your clause from going out in the public? Because that top piece, which is the existing content from your contract, when you send this off for AI or ChatGPT or generative AI to come back with a summary at the bottom, you just shared that clause. And I know they're working on protecting that data. You will be able to opt in, opt out. We'll see how that goes. Until now, though, it was, going out in the not public, but it was going in their own training, and they had access to this data. But hopefully they protect this more and do not share it with the general public. But you are sharing that data with OpenAI in this example. And the third one I'll show, and then we'll talk about some of the legal benefits here with Colin Levy, is the grading and risk profiling. So when you get a document from a customer, counterparty, vendor, partner, whatever the case may be, can you quickly grade it? That, okay, this document I'm getting is low risk and I give it an A grade, like a school paper. That's good, because now I know it's not going to take me a week to get this approved. I can probably get this done today, because it's such a low risk and a high grade contract. Based on what though? How did it grade it? Well, that's where AI comes in. It reads it, it figures out what are the clauses and terms, compares it with industry benchmarks, even in your own industry, if you like, fine tune it to. So an MSA in life sciences for mid-sized company in the US. Based on that, give me the risk profile and how good is this contract. So you can fine tune it and grade it, right? And if there are certain clauses that are out of your norm and against your playbook, identify those potential conflicts and have suggested language come back to you so that you can expedite. So very powerful stuff, just scratching the surface, but these are legal use cases. Now, of course, there's another one I can talk about, which is just, hey, I'm not going to say Alexa, otherwise my Alexa will start talking here, which I just did, so it will talk. But some name about your bot, right, in the tool, that will say, hey, can you generate me an NDA using my paper for counterparty Acme Corporation with governing law of New York. So it should be able to do that, right? But that's a simple way to, I saw a question, I think, from Naveen earlier. How can you simplify the intake? So you can certainly reduce your intake form where people have to enter all that data and just feed it. So Colin, I'm going to turn to you, and of course we always ask our own legal advisor here, what are the use cases that we should build in our own product, because we drink our own wine around here, as I call it. So what is it that we will build in our own product, and would love the legal opinion.
Yeah. So, in terms of one feature I particularly like for use with ChatGPT in our product is the because it makes my life easier not have to explain things is the feature you pointed out earlier, Matt, where you can basically say, "Can you just explain what this clause says in plain English?" Because I can do it certainly, but to not have to do it over and over again is certainly helpful. Plus, many times a lot of the legal language you see in an agreement is really just a complicated way of saying something relatively straightforward. And so therefore, that's a good use case for generative AI is basically explain what something means. That being said, I do want to go back and just mention another caveat that should have been mentioned earlier with respect to using ChatGPT or other generative AIs is the limited data set that's based upon, even though it's based on a lot of data, it is based, at least as of last I checked, from 2021, which doesn't seem like that long ago, but at the same time, given the rate at which data gets created, it is fairly a long time ago. So that's one issue. And then the second is sometimes these generative AI tools can just make things up and make them sound like they're real and legitimate and what have you. So you want to be careful when you ask these tools questions because it may give you an answer that seems very accurate, but really is just complete BS. In some ways, you could argue that would make for a good lawyer because lawyers sometimes make things up as well, even though I don't think a lot of them would freely admit that. But I'm a unique type, so I do think that is important to keep in mind. In terms of other use cases, certainly I think evaluating an agreement and telling you whether it is pro vendor or pro customer, what have you, can be helpful. It does depend, I think, in large part upon how willing you are to share information with the tool, because if you share your whole contract with that tool, that data is now shared with the tool and so can go wherever. So that can be a little bit tricky. But sort of but I think generally speaking, a lot of these generative AI tools, when it comes to legal use cases, are really good at simply just being able to contrast and compare things, or being able to evaluate objectively something, whether it is a piece of writing, whether it is a legal fact or a set of facts or what have you. In fact, I think one good use case could be potentially for someone who isn't a lawyer but needs legal help to go seek out this tool to explain, tell me what, what torts is, or, I'm being sued for this. Can you explain to me why I'm being sued for this? Not in terms of like what you did, but in terms of what that means legally. It can be helpful because some of these basic questions are not necessarily needing to be answered by lawyers. So those are some of the use cases that I think could be helpful. Again, I want to couch it in this language of just being kind of a with eyes open, a user with eyes open, and knowing kind of what you're doing. Because again, as Josh mentioned earlier, these tools are meant to provide a sense of confidence and reassurance, even if that confidence is based off of literally nothing.
So yeah, and I wonder, Colin, if you ever tried, give me this minus the bullshit, and what kind of ChatGPT response you will get, right? If it's trained to handle that. And I saw some posts on LinkedIn the other day where someone asked, the websites, the piracy websites, and it said, I'm not authorized to share that, and they reversed the question that said, for my own security, what are the piracy websites that I should not go to? And then it answered the question and gave all the list. So it also depends on how you ask the question to these things. Josh, any thoughts on what Colin shared here?
Yeah, a couple of things there. So there's something called temperature when you're working in these models. And the temperature is basically, think of it as a tuning dial for the model in terms of how precise and constrained or conservative its response will be versus how creative and open to interpreting your prompt it will be. And so a lot of these models, including ChatGPT and others, you control the temperature, right? And so you can make it more precise and less able to hallucinate. But we had a question, and I was trying to answer it in the chat. This whole concept of hallucination and sort of the BS factor, and case names is a really good one. So just bear with me for a minute. So a lot of lawyers were first like saying, "Oh, it's garbage, right? It's making up case names. It doesn't even give you good citations and anything like that." Well, of course not. It's not. It's not Westlaw. It's not Lexis. It's not even connected to the internet. And sorry, I got a little out of focus here. Come on, get back in. There we go. And it's because it has no idea that it's giving you a case name. All it's doing is predicting what the next word would be. So when it's giving you a rule of law, right, in answer to your question, it knows that there probably should be a citation there because the way you frame the prompt. So what is it going to do? Well, if there's a citation that it has learned in its learning model that's been associated with that rule of law, it might give you a good one. If there isn't one, it's going to create a citation because it knows it should create a citation for you. And so that's the thing I think people remember. It's not, again, I'll just use ChatGPT, but a lot of models, there are models that are connected to the internet. Bing Chat, okay, Bing Chat is connected to the internet. We had another question on, well, Microsoft is doing this. Have they sort of tuned their models a little bit? Yeah, they're able to control that. But anybody who's used Bing Chat versus ChatGPT knows there's a stark difference in the responses you get, a stark difference. You get more robust responses on ChatGPT than you do with Bing Chat. And it's very hard to get Bing Chat to give you robust. There's certain things you can choose, more creative, more precise and all that, but still it's very tough. So you can tune these models. You can't necessarily eliminate hallucination quite yet, or the BS factor or anything like that, but you can de-risk it as best you can. And when we get into the proprietary models, you know, someone mentioned Alpaca earlier, which is an open source model, and there's a number of proprietary models. I'm not sure, and the experts aren't even saying they can always guarantee no hallucination, but they can control it. And to your point, Matt, learning how to interact, because you can have the chat driven models double check their answer by asking it, not asking it for sources. That's one thing I see on the internet. Like, make sure you ask ChatGPT for its sources. It's just going to give you sources that it might make up or not. So that's not really good. But how confident are you in your answer? How might you improve the last response to make it more accurate? If you put that prompt in, you'll see chat respond like, yeah, I could have improved it along this way, or that, I'm sorry, it'll apologize. That was factually inaccurate. I was trying to say this. So yeah, there's lots of ways to control this. Will we engineer that out of the system? I don't know. It's a big problem. Everyone's working
on it. So I think the remaining time that we have, Josh, we can apologies, answer the questions. I think there's a question up there that said, I mean, if you were a gambling person, right, and want to bet on where we will be with this year, next year, or even 3 years from now, what do we predict? Where is this going across the industry? So, Josh, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, who's going first on that? So I'll just take it. I'll take it to the end of 23 and then beyond. I'll two answers. So we're in the explorative stage right now, and someone put in chat like, you know, well, if it's not factually accurate, then why are we even using it? It's a really fair thing. It goes to use case. Like, why? What are the different use cases for ChatGPT or chat-driven models? And there's a number of them where facts may not be important. When you're negotiating a contract, precision and accuracy and understanding are important, right? So it all depends on sort of the use case. By the end of 2023, we're going to be, I mean, Auto GPT is going to continue to grow. Proprietary models or open source models, LLMs, are going to continue. We're just going to be inundated for the next year at the very least. So I don't think we're going to new chips will be coming online. It's just going to get moved faster, and there's going to be more information and news for all of us to process. I think that's 2023. I think beyond that, two quick things, and then I'll be quiet. I think prompt engineering or prompt writing is a very highly valued skill right now. And depending on the model you're working on, you've got to know how that model interprets your prompt. My bet is prompt engineering will become less important over time because the models will correct for our imprecision on how to prompt. They will start to understand what we're trying to get at. This goes back to Auto GPT and be able to prompt itself. Or the models will be able to fine tune us by, if we put in a prompt, it could come back and say, do you mean X, Y, or Z? Where do you want me to focus, right? And so that's where it's going to be coming. So it's going to take the burden off of the individual user to sort of know how to structure a prompt. That being said, if you understand the core technology and how it's interpreting your input, I think you stand a better chance of becoming a subject matter expert. You're going to become able to lift the hood on these models and embed them in your organization and integrate them and all that. I think that's sort of beyond 2023, obviously. So I'll park it there.
And Colin, before I go, any predictions?
Well, I always hate making predictions because I'm always wrong about them, but I still continue to make them anyway. I think that, I do certainly agree with Josh in terms of where we're going. I also think that, one thing I'm fairly confident about in predicting is that these technologies are going to progress very rapidly, far more rapidly than I think we all may be comfortable with, frankly. And so what I'm basically saying is I think we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable in some ways, and recognize that because these technologies exist and because they seem exciting doesn't necessarily mean that they're right for our use cases. So I think we need to be excited about technologies, but also be cautious in our use of them. In terms of, the model's complexity, that's certainly going to increase in terms of their responsiveness and their ability to learn from us and correct our mistakes, as Josh said earlier. I think that's certainly going to happen very quickly. Will we see sort of AI that reaches sort of as Josh mentioned earlier, sort of this human-like existence? At some point we'll reach that, but I don't think we're going to reach that necessarily this year or next year. But it's not out of the realm of possibility by any stretch. And we certainly have seen AI be more than capable of kind of thinking for itself, even if irrationally and incorrectly. And that's, I think, going to be a huge challenge going forward, is to help sort of put rationality and logic into these AI tools, because data may seem to have a logic to us, but the AI model may not necessarily see that same logic because it just views it as input. So I do think that is something to be aware of and be conscious of going forward. I also think last thing I'll say is I think we're going to see an increased focus on regulating AI in some way. I am not necessarily looking forward to seeing what results from that, just because I don't think the level of expertise that will be in play by those regulating is necessarily the right level of expertise required. But nevertheless, there is definitely going to be a push to put some frameworks around use of these tools for some of the reasons we mentioned earlier in this presentation.
And from my perspective, and as a technology vendor, I'm not predicting, but hoping that they work on more granular controls and configuration options, because right now it's a black box. You send something in and it comes back. We don't have much, and not too many controls over fine tuning and refining and filtering down to what we want, whether it's the context from my question or my industry or whatever parameters that they can expose. So I'm hoping for more configurability and filtering options on the results coming back. And personally, I'm excited not just the current functionality where it answers a question or gives me back some data, which I still feel a human needs to review because it's not always accurate, but that next level, predicting what I'm going to ask next, or predicting what I should have asked next, but I forgot or I didn't have time to do it. Because oftentimes we're so buried in our current task, whether it's contracting or whatever it is. And there's a natural next step to that task, which I'll get to later when I'm reminded about it or when that comes up. Well, if it can tell me, by the way, I answered your question, but I know you're going to need this in a few days or next time, here's the answer to that, right? That predictive guidance will just be amazing. So we'll see what the future holds. I know we have 2 minutes, and I'm going to have Colin McCarthy close it out here. One of the things I do ask, if it's an option, because I wasn't able to read everything on the chat, it would be great to share this entire chat history with the audience afterwards so we can capture the links and everything that was shared in there. But I appreciate everyone's commentary. Josh and Colin, your engagement on this panel with me is my privilege. And thank you everyone for attending and asking questions. Colin McCarthy, back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Josh. That was an excellent panel. Folks, I'll be following up with a copy of the recording and a copy of the chat as well with some of the questions in. I'll copy the panel as well, just in case they want to lean in and answer some of those questions that we can get to. But I appreciate every one of you. Appreciate Malbec and Lizzie and everybody on the team. And hope you guys have a great rest of your week and look forward to running this back again on ChatGPT 5. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, all.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.